My son stood up at Sunday brunch and told my family I was losing my mind. If you've ever had someone use concern to take control, you know why I didn't argue. Evan said I was forgetting bills, missing appointments, and couldn't manage my own money. 40 minutes later, he was sitting beside me in a bank conference room when the branch manager placed a transfer request directly into his hands. It would have moved $240,000 out of my account, and the signature looked like mine. But I had never signed it. Evan had spent months building a case that I was confused. That piece of paper was the first thing he could not explain. 5 months earlier, none of this would have made sense to me. Back then, the biggest evidence my son had that I was supposedly declining was a set of car keys I could not find on a Tuesday morning. The keys were in the freezer. I wish I had a better explanation for that, but I don't. I had come home from the grocery store, carried 2 bags into the kitchen, put the frozen vegetables away, answered a phone call, and apparently dropped my keys onto the shelf beside a bag of peas. The next morning I searched the kitchen counter, the garage, both bathrooms, and every jacket I owned before I finally opened the freezer, looking for breakfast sausage, and saw them sitting there. I laughed when I found them. I was 72, retired after 41 years as an electrical contractor, and still handling my own bills, taxes, appointments, and investments. One ridiculous set of keys did not feel like evidence of anything. Then I made the mistake of telling Evan. At the time, it really did feel like a funny story. My wife, Margaret, would have laughed harder than anyone. She died 3 years earlier after 38 years of marriage. Cancer took 9 months to do what I had spent almost 4 decades assuming nothing could do, which was make that house feel completely wrong with only one person living in it. For the first year after she died, my children checked on me constantly. Laura would stop by after work with food I did not need and sit at the kitchen table pretending she was there because she happened to be in the neighborhood. She lived almost 40 minutes away, so neither of us pretended the neighborhood excuse was real. Evan handled things differently because he preferred having a task to do. He changed the batteries in my smoke detectors. He set up automatic payments on 2 utility bills. He helped me move some of Margaret's clothes into storage when I finally admitted I was not ready to give them away. When my old laptop stopped connecting to the printer, Evan came over on a Saturday and fixed it without making me feel stupid for not knowing what button I had pressed. I appreciated that. There is no version of this story where Evan had always been a terrible son, and I somehow failed to notice. That would make everything easier to understand, but it would not be true. For a long time, he was helpful. The change was gradual enough that I did not recognize it while it was happening. A few months after the freezer incident, I had a dizzy spell while trimming a hedge in the backyard. I stood up too quickly, grabbed the fence, and waited until the yard stopped moving. Laura wanted me to call my doctor. Evan wanted to drive me to the emergency room. I ended up seeing my regular doctor that afternoon. My blood pressure was low, and he adjusted one of my medications. That was it. I went home. The next morning, Evan called. He asked whether the doctor had done any memory testing. I remember laughing because the question seemed so far removed from why I had gone in. No, Evan, I got dizzy. I didn't forget my name. He laughed too. At least I thought he did. A week later, he asked again. This time he said he had been reading about how small changes can show up before a family notices anything serious. I told him I appreciated the concern, but I was fine. Then he brought up the keys. After that came the dentist appointment. I had an appointment scheduled for a Thursday morning. The office called 2 days before and moved it to Friday because my dentist had a family emergency. I wrote the new time on a pad beside my phone. Thursday morning I drove over anyway. I realized my mistake before I reached the front desk because my phone reminded me that the appointment was now the next day. I turned around, went home, and forgot about it. Evan somehow heard about it. I still do not know whether I mentioned it or Laura did. But at dinner the following weekend he said, "That's twice now, Dad." I asked him what he meant. He reminded me about the keys. I told him everybody loses things. He said putting keys in a freezer was different. Laura immediately told him to stop. I remember her exact tone because it was the first time I noticed how uncomfortable she had become whenever Evan talked about my memory. "Dad knows where he is, Evan. Leave him alone. He backed off. That should have been the end of it. Instead, over the next 2 months, concern started showing up in places where I had never asked for it. Evan wanted the password to my investment account in case there was an emergency. I said no. He suggested adding his name to my checking account so someone could pay bills if I got sick. I said I already had an attorney and documents for that. He asked who my attorney was. I told him he did not need to know. That answer bothered him more than I expected. Then one afternoon I found him in my office. He said he had been looking for a stapler. The stapler was on the kitchen counter. My desk drawer was open. Inside that drawer I kept copies of my property records, insurance policies, and the contact information for the advisor who managed part of my retirement account. Evan closed the drawer and smiled. Found it. He held up a stapler. Not mine. He had brought it from the kitchen. I knew because there was a strip of blue painter's tape on the bottom that Margaret had put there years earlier after we kept losing office supplies between rooms. I did not accuse him of anything. I wish I could tell you that was because I was being strategic. I wasn't. I could not make my mind accept what my eyes were suggesting. This was my son, the man who had stood beside me at Margaret's funeral with one arm around my shoulders because I could barely get through the service. When someone has occupied one place in your life for decades, your mind does not move them somewhere else quickly. So, I ignored it. Then my property tax notice disappeared. I had paid property taxes twice a year for more years than I cared to count. I knew roughly when the notice arrived, and I knew where I put it. That spring, nothing came. I checked the county website and found the bill there, so I paid it online before the deadline. A few days later, Evan called and casually asked whether I remembered my taxes. I told him yes. There was a pause. Then he asked whether the notice had arrived. That question stayed with me after we hung up. I went through the stack of mail beside my desk and checked the trash. The notice was nowhere in the house. The following morning, I called the county office. The woman who answered asked me to confirm my mailing address. I gave her my house. She read back a different one. It was Evan's. For a few seconds, I thought I had heard her wrong. I asked when it had been changed. She told me the request had been submitted several weeks earlier. I asked who submitted it. She could not tell me much over the phone, but she could tell me something important. The change had not come from me in person. It had been filed electronically. I changed the address back while I was still on the call. Then I sat at my desk and stared at the wall. Losing your keys is one thing. Going to an appointment on the wrong morning is another. But somebody redirecting the mail connected to your house is not forgetfulness. That afternoon, I finally called Laura. I told her about the address change. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she asked me a question I was not expecting. "Dad, has Evan asked you to sign anything lately?" I said no. Laura took a breath. "Then don't." That was when I learned my daughter had already seen something I hadn't. Laura had seen the document 3 weeks earlier. She was at Evan's house dropping off a birthday gift for Sophie when she noticed a stack of papers on the kitchen island. Evan had stepped outside to take a call, and Laura recognized my name near the top of the first page. She did not read the whole thing. She did not need to. The heading said Durable Power of Attorney. My name was listed as the person granting authority. Evan's name was listed underneath. There was no signature yet. Laura asked him about it when he came back inside. According to her, Evan barely reacted. He said he was getting paperwork ready in case I had another medical episode. He told her I had become more forgetful since Margaret died, and that somebody needed to be prepared before there was an emergency. Laura asked whether I knew about the document. Evan said he had discussed it with me. That was a lie. I was sitting at my kitchen table when Laura told me this, and the suspicion I had felt since the address change suddenly became harder to dismiss. I asked her exactly what Evan had said about me. She hesitated. That bothered me more than the answer. "Tell me." She looked down at her coffee. "He thinks you're getting worse." "Worse how?" "He says you're repeating yourself." Losing paperwork. Making strange decisions. What strange decisions? Laura shook her head. He didn't give me much. He just kept saying little things were adding up. I sat there thinking about how easy that story would be to build. A set of keys in the freezer. A dentist appointment on the wrong day. A dizzy spell in the backyard. 3 ordinary incidents, spread across months, could sound very different when somebody lined them up in the right order and left everything else out. I asked Laura whether she thought my memory was failing. She looked almost offended. No. You're sure? Dad, last month you corrected me because I put Grandma's birthday one day off. You remember the account number on the electric bill without looking at it. You still beat me at cards and accuse me of cheating. I do not accuse you. I know you cheat. That got a laugh out of her, which I needed. Then she became serious again. Something is wrong with Evan. Neither of us had said it that plainly before. I told Laura about finding him in my office and explained that the county had been sending my tax notice to Evan's house. Then I mentioned his repeated requests for my passwords. Her expression changed. What passwords? I explained that he had asked about my investment account and checking account. Laura put her coffee down. Dad, change everything. I almost told her she was overreacting. Instead, I walked into my office, opened my laptop, and tried to sign into my primary bank account. My password did not work. I tried it again. Nothing. I checked the spelling. Same result. There was a reset link, so I clicked it. The bank said it had sent a verification code to the phone number ending in 4729. That was not my number. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen. Laura leaned over my shoulder. Whose number is that? I knew exactly whose it was. Evan's. I had memorized his phone number years earlier, back when people still memorized phone numbers. We called the bank from the number printed on the back of my debit card. The representative asked me a series of questions, then transferred me to a security department. The woman there was careful about what she said. She told me that the contact number on the online profile had been changed recently. I asked how. She said the change had been authenticated through account information. That answer did not make me feel better. It meant whoever made the change knew enough about me to get through their verification process. She restored my phone number, forced a password reset, and recommended that I visit a branch with identification before making any other changes. I thanked her and hung up. Laura was already reaching for her keys. We're going now. I told her I could drive myself. I know you can. There was no argument in her voice. She waited for me to get my jacket. She did not question whether I could drive. She just wanted to be there when I spoke to the bank. The branch manager's name was Rebecca Hale. I had met her a few times over the years, mostly when Margaret and I came in for paperwork that could not be done online. Rebecca brought us into her office and closed the door. I explained the changed phone number and the redirected tax notice. I did not mention the unsigned authority document yet. At that point, I still wanted one innocent explanation to appear. Rebecca pulled up the account and studied the screen for a while. She asked if I had recently requested information about transferring a large portion of my savings to another institution. I said no. She looked at me for a moment. Are you sure? That question irritated me. Then I realized why she had asked it. She was not questioning my memory. She was checking whether the request was legitimate. I am sure. Rebecca turned the monitor slightly away from us and made a phone call. She kept her voice low. When she finished, she asked Laura to wait outside for a few minutes because the next part involved my private account information. Laura stood immediately. Of course. Before she left, she touched my shoulder. Rebecca waited until the door closed. Then she told me someone had contacted the bank, asking what documentation would be required to move money from one of my investment-linked accounts into a newly opened account elsewhere. No transfer had occurred. The inquiry had been treated as informational, but the person making it had known my full name, date of birth, account type, approximate balance, and the last digits of an account number. I felt my stomach tighten. Did they give a name? Rebecca said the caller identified himself as my son. He claimed he was helping because I was having memory problems. That sentence hurt more than I expected because he had already begun using the story. It was no longer something he said privately to Laura. He was telling strangers that I could not manage my own life. I asked Rebecca what the caller had been told. She said the bank would require proper authorization before discussing or moving protected assets, and nothing had been changed based on that conversation. Then she paused. There is something else. 3 days after that call, someone had attempted to add an external account to my online profile. The verification had failed. The attempt came shortly before my phone number was changed. Rebecca could not tell me who owned the outside account without further review. She did not need to. I already knew enough. I asked her to lock down everything she could. New password. New security questions. No telephone changes without additional verification. No external transfers without in-person confirmation. No new authorized users. She documented that I had concerns about unauthorized access and told me their fraud team would review the activity. When Laura came back inside, I gave Rebecca permission to explain the basic security issue to her. She listened without interrupting. On the drive home, neither of us spoke for several minutes. Then Laura asked the question I had been avoiding. Are you going to confront him? I looked out the passenger window. No. She glanced at me. Why not? Because right now I know he's been looking. Looking at what? My accounts, my house, maybe more than that. And that's not enough. It's enough to scare me. I still don't know what he's trying to do. That answer did not satisfy her, but she understood it. If I called Evan that afternoon and accused him, he could deny everything. He could say he was worried. He could say the bank misunderstood him. He could say the phone number change was a mistake. And worst of all, he could use my anger as another example of an old man becoming irrational. So I did something Evan did not expect. I acted normal. I answered his calls. I let him ask whether I had remembered to take my medication. I let him remind me about appointments that were already written on my calendar. When he offered to come over and help organize my paperwork, I told him I had everything under control. He started calling more often. Sometimes twice a day. Each conversation had the same shape. How are you feeling? Did you sleep well? Did you pay that bill? Did you remember your appointment? Have you thought more about letting me help with the accounts? At first, those questions sounded like concern. Once I knew about the bank call, they sounded like documentation. He was building a record. Not on paper, at least not yet. He was building it in conversations, in messages, in the things he could later say he had been worried about for months. A week after the bank visit, I received a text from him. Dad, I think we need to have a serious conversation about planning for the future. I don't want to wait until something happens and we have no choices. I read it 3 times. Then I wrote back. You're right, we should talk soon. His response arrived almost immediately. Good. I'll put some things together. That was exactly what I wanted him to do. Because while Evan was putting his things together, I had finally made 2 appointments of my own. The first was with my doctor. The second was with an attorney Evan did not know I had already called. The doctor appointment came first. I had known Dr. Patel for almost 12 years. He was the same physician who treated the dizzy spell Evan had turned into evidence that something was wrong with me. I told him exactly why I was there. My son thinks I'm developing memory problems. Dr. Patel looked up from the computer. Do you? No. Does Laura? No. Has anyone else mentioned it? Only Evan. That answer seemed to interest him. I explained the freezer incident, the dentist appointment, the blood pressure episode, and then everything that had happened afterward. The redirected mail. The changed phone number. The call to the bank. The questions about my accounts. The power of attorney Laura had seen in Evan's kitchen. Dr. Patel listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. If you're asking whether 3 isolated mistakes prove cognitive decline, the answer is no. I told him I wanted more than his opinion. I wanted documentation. If Evan was going to tell banks, relatives, or anyone else that I could no longer make decisions for myself, I wanted something current in my medical record showing where I actually stood. Dr. Patel understood immediately. He arranged a formal cognitive assessment through a specialist. The appointment was 4 days later. I went alone. That was important to me. The specialist asked questions about dates, locations, recent events, words I had to remember and repeat later. There were number exercises, drawing exercises, attention tests, and questions about how I managed daily life. None of it was especially dramatic. Some parts were annoying. At one point, I told her I had spent 41 years keeping electricians from wiring commercial buildings backward, so I hoped remembering 5 words in the correct order was not going to be the thing that finally defeated me. She laughed. Then she made me remember the 5 words anyway. The evaluation took a little over an hour. When it was finished, she told me she did not see evidence that I lacked the ability to manage my own affairs. The written report arrived several days later. I read it twice. Then I put a copy in a folder. For the first time since Laura told me about that power of attorney, I felt like I had solid ground under my feet again. The second appointment was different. My attorney was a woman named Helen Ward. Margaret and I had hired her years earlier when we updated our wills. After Margaret died, Helen helped me revise several beneficiary documents and simplify the estate. Evan knew I had an attorney. He did not know her name. I had never thought that mattered until now. Helen's office was on the 2nd floor of a small brick building about 20 minutes from my house. I brought everything I had. Banknotes. Screenshots. The county address change. Text from Evan. A copy of the cognitive assessment. And 1 handwritten page where I had listed every unusual thing I could remember from the previous few months. Helen spent almost 40 minutes reading before she asked her first real question. Has Evan ever had power of attorney for you? No. Has he ever been an authorized signer on your accounts? No. Does he have access to your email? Not that I know of. She looked at me. That answer needs to become yes or no. We changed it that afternoon. With Laura's help, I created a new email account that Evan did not know existed and moved financial alerts there. I changed the password on my old account. Then we reviewed every document that gave anyone authority if I became unable to make decisions. Margaret had originally been first. After she died, I had named Evan and Laura together as backup agents. I had forgotten that detail because the paperwork had been done years earlier, before any of this. Evan had not forgotten. That was when I understood why he had been so interested in proving I was declining. If I became legally unable to manage my affairs, he would already be standing close to the door. He still could not take my money because he felt like it. But he would have a position he could use. And if Laura could be pushed aside, persuaded, or made to believe I really was confused, he might gain far more control than I had ever intended. Helen prepared new documents. Evan was removed. Laura became my primary agent if I ever genuinely needed someone to act for me. A professional fiduciary would serve as backup. The change was signed, witnessed, and documented, while there was no question about my capacity. Helen also had me sign a written instruction stating that no one was authorized to change ownership, beneficiaries, or access to my property merely because a relative claimed I was forgetful. It felt strange having to put that sentence on paper. I had raised Evan. I had paid for braces, college textbooks, a wedding rehearsal dinner, and the first year of an earlier business he started in his 20s and later abandoned. Now I was sitting in a lawyer's office paying someone to make sure the same son could not take control of my checking account. Helen must have noticed what I was thinking. She closed the folder. You don't have to decide today what this means for your relationship with him. I know. You only have to decide what access he should have while you figure it out. That helped. I did not need to decide whether Evan was still the son I thought I knew. I only needed to stop giving him opportunities to make decisions that belonged to me. 2 days later, Rebecca from the bank called. Their review had found more activity. Someone had submitted a written request asking the bank to prepare a transfer from one of my accounts. It had not been completed. The document required additional verification because of the security restrictions I had placed on the account. Rebecca asked whether I would come into the branch. I was there that afternoon. She had the document waiting. The transfer request would have moved a large portion of my savings into an account at another financial institution. The destination account was not mine. I stared at the amount for several seconds. Then I looked at the signature. Whoever had done it had practiced. The first letter of my name looked almost right. The slope was close. Even the way I crossed the last letter was similar. But I knew my own hand. That was not my signature. Rebecca asked whether I recognized the destination account. I did not. She explained that because the transfer had never been approved, the money had not moved. The document was now part of the bank's fraud review. I asked how it had been submitted. Through a secure upload tied to my online profile. That meant whoever sent it had likely been inside my account during the same period when my contact number had been changed. I felt sick. Then Rebecca showed me something else. There was a note attached to the request. It said the transfer was being arranged as part of my estate planning because I was experiencing cognitive difficulties and my son was assisting me. My son. The person trying to move my money was close enough to know my accounts and wanted the bank to believe he was protecting me. I asked Rebecca whether Evan's name appeared anywhere on the transfer itself. Not as the recipient. But it appeared in the contact notes from the earlier phone call. That still did not prove where the destination account led. I understood that. I also understood that I did not need to know everything before protecting myself. I asked for a copy of the transfer request. Rebecca said she could provide documentation related to my account after their internal process. She also wanted to know whether I wished to make a report concerning the forged signature. That question stopped me. Until then, I had been thinking like a father. I had been asking why Evan would do this. Whether he was desperate. Whether there was some debt I did not know about. Whether he had convinced himself he was only borrowing. Rebecca was asking me to think like the owner of the account. Someone had tried to move my money using my name. I told her I wanted everything documented. When I got home, Evan had left me a voicemail. He sounded cheerful. He said he had finished putting together some information for our family conversation and thought Sunday brunch would be easiest for everyone. Then he said something that made me replay the message. I think it'll be good for Laura to hear it from everyone, Dad. She doesn't see you as often as I do. I almost laughed. Laura had been at my house 4 times that month. Evan had been there once. But he was already arranging the room. He did not just want me to surrender control. He wanted witnesses who believed I needed to. If you have ever watched family concern turn into pressure, you know how easy it is to start defending every small thing you do. If stories like this are why you watch this channel, subscribe here. I had spent weeks learning that the better move was to stop defending myself and let Evan finish. I called Helen. I explained the transfer request and Evan's brunch invitation. She was quiet for a moment. Her next question was whether Evan knew I had discovered the transfer. No. Does he know about the assessment? No. Does he know you've changed your legal documents? No. Then don't tell him yet. That surprised me. I had expected my attorney to tell me to avoid the brunch entirely. Instead, she asked whether I felt safe attending. I did. Evan was manipulative, but I had no reason to believe he would become physically violent. Helen told me to keep the conversation simple. I was not to sign anything or hand over passwords. If Evan made false claims about my medical condition, I should correct them once and then let him talk. If he thinks the family is already with him, he may tell you more than he would in private, she said. That sounded like something Margaret would have understood immediately. I was still learning it. The next morning, I called Rebecca. I told her Sunday was likely when Evan intended to pressure me into signing something. I asked whether she would be willing to provide whatever documentation the bank could legally give me about the rejected transfer before then. She said she would see what could be prepared. Then she asked one question. "Mr. Mercer, does your son know the transfer failed because you locked the account?" "I don't think so." There was a pause. "Then he may still believe you're unaware of it." I looked at the calendar on my kitchen wall. Sunday was 3 days away. For weeks, Evan had been watching me for signs that I was confused. He had no idea I had been watching him too. That afternoon, I accepted the brunch invitation. Evan replied less than a minute later. "Great. I think once everyone sits down together, you'll see we're only trying to help." I read the message, put my phone on the counter, and opened the folder Helen had helped me prepare. Inside were my new legal documents, the cognitive assessment, copies of the account security records, and an empty plastic sleeve waiting for one final piece of paper from the bank. Evan was planning an intervention. I was going to let him have one. Sunday morning, I woke before 6 and lay there rehearsing how little I planned to say. Helen had been clear. I could skip the argument about my memory and focus on keeping my signature off anything Evan brought. Laura picked me up a little after 8. When she saw the folder in my hand, she nodded toward it. "You have everything?" "Everything I need." On the drive over, she told me my sister Melissa and my cousin Mark would be there. Evan had called them during the week and said he was worried about me. He had told Melissa I was getting confused with money and told Mark I had forgotten to pay my property taxes. "I paid them before the deadline," I said. "I know. And Evan knows." Laura nodded. By then, he was no longer stretching real mistakes. He was adding things that had never happened. Evan opened the front door before we reached the porch. His wife, Rachel, was bringing coffee from the kitchen, and Sophie was at one end of the table with markers beside her plate. Melissa and Mark were already there. Everybody was warm to me. That made the whole thing worse, because they had not come to attack me. They believed Evan had invited them to help. Brunch stayed ordinary for almost 20 minutes. Sophie talked about school. Mark complained about an air conditioner repair. Melissa asked about a trip I planned to take that fall. Evan was the first one to test the story he had built. "You still planning to drive all that way by yourself?" "Yes." He gave Melissa a quick glance and let the question sit there. A few minutes later, Rachel wanted to know if I had brought my blood pressure medicine. I told her it was at home. Evan leaned forward. "Dad, aren't you supposed to take the afternoon one with food?" "I take it in the morning." "Are you sure?" "Yes." Rachel looked uncomfortable. Laura looked ready to argue, so I touched her arm before she could. Melissa finally asked whether I had noticed any memory changes on my own. I told her the truth. I had misplaced things. I had gone to the dentist on the wrong morning, after the office changed the appointment. I had once left my keys beside a bag of frozen peas. Evan leaned back like I had just made his case for him. Then I added that I still managed my accounts, paid my bills, knew my medication schedule, and had already paid the tax bill he claimed I forgot. Evan sighed. "Dad, this is why we're here. You don't realize how much you're struggling." He repeated the same examples he had been using for months: the keys, the dentist, and the dizzy spell. Then he said I had become suspicious about money and defensive whenever he tried to help. He also mentioned that I had started changing passwords. Laura noticed the same thing I did. "How do you know he changed his passwords?" she asked. Evan looked at her. "Because he told me." "No, I didn't," I said. He moved past it quickly. He said he had spoken to people about planning ahead and reached for the leather folder beside his coffee. The first document he removed was a durable power of attorney with my name printed at the top and his underneath. The second was a rough inventory of my house, investments, insurance, and regular expenses. Melissa stared at the pages. "Daniel, did you give him this information?" Some of it was family knowledge. I did not give him an account inventory, and I never asked him to prepare that document. Evan shook his head. "We've talked about all of this. We have never talked about you taking control of my accounts. His answer came sharper than before when he said, "Nobody is taking control. I'm trying to make sure there is a plan before something happens." I asked him one question. "Do you believe I can manage my own bank account today?" He hesitated, then looked around the table before answering. "I think you need help with it." "All right." Laura turned toward me, but I kept looking at Evan. "Then come to the bank with me." The room went quiet. Evan frowned. "What?" "I have an appointment at 10:30. Rebecca Hale is expecting me. You have been telling everyone that I cannot manage my finances, so come with me and explain that to the person who manages the account." He glanced at the clock. "Dad, we can do that another day. You wanted a family conversation today. I'm giving you time to finish it." He looked at the folder, then at Melissa and Mark. Refusing to go would have looked strange after everything he had just said. "Fine." Laura stood up too. "I'm coming." Rachel stayed with Sophie and the rest of the family. She looked at Evan as he picked up the leather folder, and I could see she had questions of her own now. The drive to the branch took less than 15 minutes. Evan spent most of it looking at his phone. I spent it wondering whether he still believed I knew nothing about the transfer. Rebecca was waiting near the front desk when we arrived. She brought the three of us into a small conference room and closed the door. Before she said anything about the account, she asked me whether I wanted Laura and Evan present for the discussion. "Yes. You have my permission to discuss the registered transfer and the account security changes with both of them." That mattered. I wanted there to be no question about why she was speaking in front of my children. Rebecca opened a slim envelope. "Mr. Mercer, this is the copy you requested." Then she did something Evan clearly did not expect. She placed the transfer request directly into his hands. "Mr. Mercer has told us this is not his signature. Do you recognize the document?" Evan looked down at the page. The request would have moved $240,000 from my account to another financial institution. My name was typed at the top. A version of my signature sat near the bottom. "No," he said. "I've never seen this." Rebecca did not argue with him. She explained what the bank had documented. Someone had contacted the bank identifying himself as my son and said I was having cognitive difficulties. My online contact number had later been changed to Evan's number. An external account had been added unsuccessfully. After that, the transfer request was uploaded through my online profile. Evan put the paper on the table. "I called to ask what Dad would need if he got worse. That doesn't mean I uploaded this." Laura spoke before I did. "You knew about the password change at brunch. Dad never told you." Evan looked at me. "You've been setting me up." "I secured my account after somebody changed my contact information." Rebecca slid another page toward me, a record of the security changes I had requested after discovering the problem. Then I took the cognitive assessment from my own folder. I also had the memory question checked. Evan stared at it. I explained that a specialist had evaluated me and found no evidence that I lacked the ability to manage my own affairs. Dr. Patel had the report. Helen had it. The bank had been told about it as part of the security review. "One assessment doesn't mean you'll never need help," Evan said. "I may need help someday." "That is not what you told the bank." I took out the revised legal paperwork next. Years earlier, Margaret and I had named both children as backups if I ever became unable to act for myself. Helen had now removed Evan from that role. Laura was temporarily named, with an independent fiduciary as backup while I decided on a permanent arrangement. Evan read the first page and pushed it back. "So that's it? You just cut me out because I was worried about you?" Rebecca had already given us the facts she was authorized to discuss, so she stepped out and left the three of us in the room. I waited until the door closed. "Did you submit the transfer?" "No." "Did you change the phone number on my account?" He looked away. Laura said his name once. "Evan." He rubbed his face. "The business is in trouble." That was the first answer he gave that did not sound rehearsed. He had been running a commercial property consulting business for several years. From the outside, it looked successful. The car, the trips, the dinners, all of it looked like evidence that he was doing well. He told us 2 projects had gone bad, and another client had stopped paying. He had borrowed against the business to cover operating costs and then used personal credit when that ran out. He kept expecting 2 pending contracts to close before the pressure caught him. They did not close in time. "How much did you need?" Laura asked. He looked at the transfer form. "Enough to get through a few months." I asked why he had not come to me. "Because you would have said no." He was right about that. I would not have moved that much of my retirement money into a business already carrying debt. But he had decided my answer was a problem to work around. The dizzy spell gave him an idea. The keys and dentist appointment gave him examples. The old legal documents meant he would be one of 2 backup agents if I genuinely lost capacity. If he could persuade Laura that I was already there, he would be closer to the access he wanted. I asked him about the signature again. He stared at the paper for a long time. I signed it. Laura closed her eyes. He started explaining immediately. He said he planned to repay the money when the contracts closed. He said he had convinced himself the transfer was temporary. He said he never meant for any of this to become permanent. I asked about the phone number and the county mail. He admitted that the afternoon he claimed to be looking for a stapler, he had copied account information from my files and used a saved browser session on my office computer to change the recovery number. The tax address came later. He redirected that notice so it would miss my house and give him another example of something I had supposedly forgotten. That closed 2 questions I had been carrying for months. I stopped him there. "You told my bank I was confused before you forged my name. You told our family I was confused after you forged it. That part was useful to you, and you knew it wasn't true." He did not argue. I told him the bank's internal review would continue, and that what they did with the fraudulent request was not mine to control. My attorney would handle anything that required my response. Then I gave him one condition that had nothing to do with money. "You called Melissa, Mark, Rachel, and anyone else you thought needed to hear that I was cognitively declining. You are going to call every one of them again and tell them you had no medical basis for saying it." Evan looked at me. "Dad, you don't have to explain your debt to them. That belongs to you. What you said about me belongs to me. Correct it." He nodded once. When we left the bank, Laura offered to drive me home. Evan stood beside his car with the leather folder under his arm. He asked what happened to us now. I told him I did not know. At least now there was no form he could fill out, and no story he could tell that would decide that answer for me. The calls started that afternoon. Melissa phoned me after Evan spoke to her. She sounded embarrassed. She said he had admitted there was no diagnosis, and that he had made ordinary mistakes sound like proof, because he wanted the family to support him taking a larger role in my finances. I told her I was not angry with her. She had believed my son was worried about me. That was the reason his story worked. Mark called the next day. Rachel sent a short message saying Evan had finally told her how bad the business debt was and that they were working through it privately. I did not ask for details. Whatever happened inside their marriage was theirs to handle. The bank later confirmed that the destination account on the rejected transfer was connected to a business entity Evan controlled. By then his admission had already answered the question for me, but the confirmation closed the last practical gap. I met with Helen again the following week. Laura came with me because I wanted her to hear the new plan before I signed anything. She surprised me by asking to be removed as the person in charge of my finances if I ever became incapacitated. "I want to help you," she said. "I don't want Evan spending the next 20 years believing I got something from this. Hire someone whose last name isn't Mercer." Helen smiled. So, that is what I did. A professional fiduciary became the financial agent who would step in only if the conditions in my documents were actually met. Laura remained the person I wanted contacted about medical decisions and emergencies, but she would not be responsible for control her brother's inheritance or my daily money. I also changed my estate plan, though not in the way Evan expected when he eventually heard about it. My estate still divides between both children, but any future distribution to Evan would be handled by an independent trustee while he had unresolved business debt. He could not use my estate as collateral or pull money forward to rescue a company. If his finances stabilized, the trustee had room to adjust distributions under the terms Helen drafted. That choice mattered to me because I did not want revenge to become another version of the same mistake Evan had made. He tried to take a decision away from me because he disliked the answer. I wanted my documents to protect my decisions without turning Laura into the winner of a family contest she never entered. Evan and I had almost no contact for the next 4 months. I heard pieces of what was happening through Laura. He sold the expensive car. He cut staff at the business and began negotiating directly with creditors. Rachel stayed with him, but she took over their household accounts for a while. None of those details earned him access to my money again. They were signs that he had finally started dealing with the problem he had tried to push onto me. Then one Saturday morning he showed up at my house carrying a cardboard box. It held old family paperwork he had taken home after Margaret died, including insurance copies, property records, and tax documents. Some of it explained how he had learned enough about my accounts to sound convincing when he called the bank. He put the box on my kitchen table. This should have been here the whole time. I looked through it and nodded. He asked whether he could stay for coffee. I said yes. We talked for almost an hour about the business, Sophie, and how he had managed to convince himself that borrowing money without permission would somehow become acceptable if he repaid it quickly enough. At one point he said, "I kept telling myself I was protecting everything. The company, the house, my family. You were protecting the version of your life you wanted people to see." He nodded. Then he apologized without explaining it away. He said he had used my age because it made his own actions easier to justify. Once he started describing me as confused, every disagreement became useful to him. If I forgot something, he had evidence. If I remembered and challenged him, he could call me defensive. That was the part I needed him to understand. I told him I did not need him to agree with every decision I made. I needed him to accept that the decision was mine while I was capable of making it. He said he understood. I do not know whether trust comes back completely after something like that. Mine has not. Evan is not authorized on my accounts. He does not have my passwords. He does not hold my legal documents. When we talk about money, it is because I choose to talk about it. We still have dinner sometimes. Sophie still beats me at card games and insists she is not cheating. Laura still calls when she happens to be in the neighborhood, which continues to be a lie because she still lives 40 minutes away. The difference is that help now arrives after I ask for it. A few months after the brunch, the next property tax notice came in the mail. It had my name on it and my address underneath. I paid it online that afternoon, printed the receipt, and put it in the same desk drawer where I keep my insurance papers. Then I went outside to finish trimming the hedge. I stood up more slowly this time.